Okay, well, thank you, Kalen Iwamoto and Mario Klingemann for arriving today. David Upton's doing the sort of Zoom operation for CAS, so he's also involved. Today's talk is to do with AI, art and curation. Now, initially, I thought we'd have more about curation, but it sort of moved more towards artistic practice and curation. We've got Kalen.
Hi.
Now, Kalen works with Julian Silvano in a company to create artworks that exist between art, language, technology. It's a very interesting operation where it's some physical works, some conceptual works. It's been going quite a few years now. And we also have Mario, who is in Basel, which is great that you've managed to make it. I'm just going to try your next. Yes, there we are. Now, this was the recent exhibition in London of algorithmic evolution, which I was at, but we didn't get. I kind of arrived and then hung around and then went. It was so crowded, I couldn't believe it. It was absolutely packed. So I saw your talk, a bit of that, and it was all very exciting. But this was before I got there. I got there early and then left early, but I was there while they were setting up. So these are why the shots are deserted, in fact. But I mean, it was packed later. Now then, Kalen co-founded Verse, which is a very well-known poetry and technology group in 2021. And Mario is well known for creating lots of things, really, but also, I mean, the most well-known one now is Botto. We were just talking about that, which is an autonomous, decentralized AI artist. And then Kalen and Mario will be answering questions about their work later on, quite soon. And then we'll have general questions for the two artists. And then we go into people listening can ask questions and maybe discuss some points. So today I'm using the term AI to cover machine learning systems, public text to art tools, the assistant in your smartphone, etc. Just everything. I mean, it's got to this point where AI just means all of these things. It's a general term, so I'll use it. Now, I'm going to add references. I've got references from this session, like various things I mentioned. So if it all seems a bit vague, it's because there's not enough time to go into things in depth. AI represents an alien intelligence, humanity's first encounter with a non-human creativity or intelligence. It's a real example of the other, which has always been this sort of concept of alien intelligences and so on. And now we've created an intelligence, from our own resources, but it's still a separate entity. Even if it's not conscious, it's still a separate entity. Since we only get the outputs we ask the AI for, who knows what it's capable of? The basic system is quite opaque for humans, really. Current AI models seem harmless, producing essays and art, but they're alien monsters with friendly interfaces. This is a Shoggoth image, which is quite a famous meme, in that all of this monster is the language, the large language model, and then it's been improved so that we don't get, all the chaotic things that it could do or do by accident. Many artists find the intersection of personal art, art history and technology fertile ground for innovation using cutting-edge tools, or the tools themselves are the topic. Net art about network effects, AI art about AI art itself. Artists look for new ways to make art that's specific to AI rather than use it to make art like images. The next step may be AI creating and curating personalized art, delivering memetic content for individuals who can engage as deeply as they choose. So you might choose to just play with it for fun, or you might make birthday cards with it, or you might make art with it. So there's a huge range of things, or you might make, things for your business presentations. There's a huge range of things that can be done with it. In an online attention economy, the title artist becomes just another personal identifier. The heroic artist and their journey for meaning is relegated to daydreaming and keyboard tapping. It's a bit harsh, isn't it? But anyway. So, there's a sort of grey area whether some things are actually new. But if you examine the AI system itself and don't treat it as a tool, then you can get like new art forms coming out of it, which is what we're interested here, I think. Some artists like Anna Ridler or systems like Botto make overproduction the topic, and overproduction is a thing that I'd quite like to talk about or get you to talk about later. If you are using these systems, they will produce a huge amount of stuff. and then you have to curate before you show to people. And Botto does this within a voting system. Cultural and economic impact. In brief, IP remains contentious. Artists like Holly Herndon created new IP models or methods such as Holly Plus, where you can sort of use her voice, while legacy artists like Kate Bush and Paul McCartney protest with silent records. I don't know whether people outside of England have heard about this. Silent records echoing 1980s home taping is killing music campaigns. Just to mention Midjourney, busy getting sued by Disney and Universal at the moment. So this is becoming a bigger topic as it goes along, really. But more pressing are projected AI-related job losses in transport, logistics, administration, education, manufacturing, kind of everything, really. Even I read this article, like CEOs are under threat because an AI do planning better. And this is sort of arriving like a tsunami that nobody's taking any notice of. But they will notice soon. And it's funny that the art world debates and rows about this is really good, big news, like Disney doing things and famous musicians complaining, etc. So I think that shows the sort of celebrity attention economy we're in now, in that there isn't really serious discussion of job losses. I don't think the British government says, bring it on, bring on more AI, and they don't really know what they're saying, but they're busy pushing it. The question is, will AI replace the concept of art itself with personalised media created on demand to share in a community? Nobody's interested in a bigger world. Community is enough. So, we've become more community focused. So now we move on to guests. So we've got Mario, has been called a subversive systems or conceptual artist. We look at Mario's Botto, which creates and selects AI text-to-art outputs, and most recently AI-coded algorithmic art, which was a recent exhibition in London. Also, if we have the time, the AI-driven art critic dog, Acre, the artificially intelligent critical canine. Kalen, conceptual writer-artist Kalen, works where text, AI, and blockchain meet. She treats AI as a linguistic sparring partner at the 2024 Paris Group Show, AI, My Sparring Partner. She re-edited large model outputs. So maybe we can talk about that later. Her hardware, Miniscriber word synth, lets audiences manipulate verses, while her series, The Writing on the Wall, exhibits AI-written labels for imaginary artworks. Now, this is Kalen's most recent work, I believe. Is it, Kalen?
This is my most recent AI work, let's say.
It's a minimal artwork comprising gallery labels from the future. So they go forward in like 10-year jumps. So they're from the future, they're unseen artworks. So you described readers of these labels, because they're made as labels, that's why they've got the dots. And they look like labels, obviously, gallery labels. So you imagine readers of them, imagining the artworks. I've got a few quick questions, and then you can maybe just chat about it for a bit.
Sure.
Is this art gallery label art a comment on the power of curation, since it assumes art galleries will exist in the future, or on the power of imagination?
Well, I think it definitely does reference kind of the institutional critique, right, and the framing of art that determines the value and the definition of art, whether it's art or not art. So yeah, it is certainly influenced by that type of art. But I think it's also, like you said, it depends on the imagination of the viewer. And one of the things I wanted to do was to turn on, to upend the kind of the relationship that, or the role that we usually assign to AI versus the humans, where, there's a lot of text to image art. And the role of the machine is to create the visual image, and it's the role of the humans to input the text. And so here I kind of reverse those roles, and I actually trained, let's say, I fed the AI with my descriptions of my past work. So it's kind of, in a sense, trained on the concepts I use and the themes and my work. And there was a lot of curation. Like I read like, I don't know, over 100 different outputs to select ones that I thought kind of approached something that I was to to choose things that I was happy with. So, and here it's the audience, right, that supplies the image, even if it's just internally.
That explains it really well. Thank you. I've got a question which you might, it's kind of outside of what you just said. What if somebody created images from the labels as prompts or even physical works because they're describing physical things with diodes and screens and whatever?
Yeah.
How would you feel if you would you have ownership of those outputs, or do you think you don't feel that way about them? Did, did
I
you
guess
actually did you try and make any text to art from it?
no, I didn't. But I would love to see that. I think that would be super interesting, actually. I wouldn't claim any ownership or authorship over it, but I think that would be a really interesting experiment. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, ownership is a funny one with all this with AI. I mean, I researched writers like years ago, 2020, I think, about whether they felt they owned. We tried them out on new, it must have been GPT-2, I can't remember now, GPT-2, and people were amazed that it did anything. But they all claimed that it was their work, not somebody else's, even though they might have edited it minimally or not at all, because they'd kind of brought it into being. So maybe people could experiment with text to prompt using your labels even. In fact,
Yeah.
I'm surprised. Funny enough, I'm surprised I didn't do it. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, why didn't everybody do it? Because it's like a description of a thing, isn't it? And I found when I was doing AI anthology, I put in philosophers' quotes just straight into text to art, and it would come up with incredibly weird images because it didn't really have a connection with any physical thing. It would just come up with whatever the system pattern matched at that point with those words. So maybe we should, maybe other people now could even do it in the background and see what we've got at the end.
That would be,
Anyway,
that's
okay, now the next one I was going to show is the mini scriber, which is exceptionally cool. And I think Sean Clark, of the chair of the CAS, runs a thing called R10, which is a kind of old music equipment studio with really old synths that are enormous, and they have to rebuild them from scratch to make them work. And
amazing.
it's got loads of old music equipment up in Leicester, and this looks like a piece of, well, relatively old music equipment. So perhaps you want to talk a bit about that now?
Yeah, sure. This one is so I did actually use AI for this, even though I wouldn't necessarily qualify it as an AI work. The text was actually written with AI, and the content of the text refers to the theme or the underlying concept behind the overall piece. But the mini scriber is a what we call a conceptual poetry synth. And it's obviously influenced by the music industry, and it's a kind of a convergence of the musical and literary avant-garde. Basically, you have the text, the input texts, and you can turn the knobs, and you can apply all sorts of conceptual and avant-garde poetry techniques onto the text. So, and these are in turn actually also influenced by the vocabulary around synths. So you have like cut up, cut out. You have like waveform. There's also digital techniques as well, like ASCII, and you can act on the text. And I also wanted it to be a commentary on, maybe not a commentary, but to address sort of the textual overproduction. So you mentioned, Geoff, you were talking about overproduction in terms of images and AI, and we've had textual overproduction. We've had to contend with that for a bit longer because we've had Web 2 and social media and blogging. So we've kind of been there's been a deluge of texts that we've had to grapple with, right? So this is and it's kind of a proposition. So I like to imagine or to propose alternative writing strategies and reading
Mm.
experiences. So it's kind of a way for readers to turn them into conceptual writers, and ask questions like, uh, what could writing look like if it was done not in the conventional sense? This
Mm.
is conceptual writing, where you can, use cut up, work on the visual elements. That is, I think nonetheless writing.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's definitely good stuff. I've got a quick question, which is, why did you choose to make a physical device rather than an app, like monitor only kind of system for this? Or are you thinking of bringing out an app in the future in the way that's, physical synths, music synths all have VST plugins for digital audio workstations, they've been around a while. So the physical thing exists first and then later a digital one comes out. A digital,
We hadn't planned on it, but why not?
yeah, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Originally, we actually came up with this idea like a long time ago, well, a couple years ago, and we had initially planned on doing something on the blockchain as well.
What feedback have you had from people using this device?
Um, Really good feedback. Everybody loves it. It's been overwhelmingly positive, and they like the physical, they like the nostalgia behind the synth. And I think that's also, that's also another thing that I find interesting, because in the music industry, they embraced like technology and they really let it influence the production of music. So there was DJing, there was sampling, there was remixing. So this is I translated that into a literary field because I feel like in the literary scene, it hasn't really we haven't really embraced technology in the same way that the music industry has.
Yeah,
So
sure.
what would it look like if we were remixing, sampling pre-existing text? So not adding new text, but working on text, kind of like the music industry is doing.
Okay.
So
But do you find that physical objects are more interesting for you to make than
I do like physical
code?
objects. Yeah. And
Yeah, because
like
you've
you
got
mentioned,
couples as well, the Balzac thing.
yes, the couple
Yeah, yeah.
machines.
Which isn't, you said isn't AI or anything, but it's still a physical object, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a text generator. Yeah.
Yeah. So you like that side of it?
I do like physical objects, and as you mentioned, like Julian Silvano is my partner
Yeah, yeah,
in the atelier, and
yeah.
his training is in the plastic arts.
Uh-huh.
So, we like to think about how to give plastic form to some of these concepts.
Thank you. We got more questions later to come back to. I'm just going to move now on to Mario. This is from the current gallery on your web on the Botto. It's not yours, is it now? It's Botto.
Oh, yeah, that's the whole thing there. It's quite important to just to differentiate between
Yeah,
me and
perhaps you should
Botto.
perhaps explain that to everyone. How you
Okay,
sort of moved
all
away
right.
from it.
Yeah, so the idea of Botto is to create an artificial artist with all that it takes, not just a picture making machine, but really kind of an artist that is like a human artist, adapt to changing kind of ecosystem, which is art, right? That's the whole
Yeah,
point. Like if you build a fixed system that is not able to adapt, it will eventually become irrelevant. And at the same time, yeah, it is not me. So it is the whole idea is to let go of control. So and the whole way Auto is set up, I don't know. Yeah. So I call the way Botto is set up a trinity. So it consists out of three components. One is, of course, let's say the AI, for like a complex changing system of LLMs, image generators, everything that we kind of say is machine generated, but this is coupled with a human community, which is in form of a so-called DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization on the blockchain, which governs the AI. So in a kind of a plutocratic process. So it's decisions like everybody can join it by using the third component, which is the currency. So there's also a cryptocurrency connected to it, which is defining how much share you have in Botto, and which is also giving you like the more Botto currency you have staked, the more voting rights you have. So it's in a way, the more you believe in the project, the more also you have at stake, but also the more you are allowed to kind of take over decisions that at a every at a well at each current stage of the project, the AI is not seen as mature enough to make. That is always like that's
sure.
the whole thing. Like if you propose an autonomous system, like Botto kind of came into this world in 2021, And at that time, kind of LLMs weren't as capable as they are now. So at that point, having said that an AI is capable to write its own code to do these things would have been kind of pretend play or a lie. And so, yeah.
That's right. I mean, these I've just got some older images here.
Oh, that's from the Genesis period, the first year,
right.
where Botto was still using DQGAN and Clip. So it was pre-diffusion, because it was just like the diffusion models came out a bit later. So in that period,
I recognize this style. That style is very of that period, isn't it?
Yeah.
So okay, the questions I have are, oh yeah, there's this thing about the name Botto, but you said it was Botto was thought up by market research.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. So actually, I wrote the initial concept for Botto in 2018, and I proposed it to one of my patrons. And at that time, the time wasn't ready for it yet. And as we might remember, kind of an important component of Botto is actually the blockchain, because it allows that whole type of automation and that whole idea that a machine can pay for its own upkeep. And having done that in a pre-NFT time would have caused well, there would have been some kind of layer of selling digital art, right? I mean, all of you probably know how difficult that has been to, I mean, sell USB sticks, or I don't know, sell a JPEG. So it took until 2020 until I pulled it out again, and then kind of all the components were in place to allow that idea to become a reality. I guess.
And of course,
and then I had actually delegated a lot of the components to actually another company that did the execution. So I reserved my thing to building the AI part, but I said, blockchain, I'm not an expert. And because in a way they are holding the reins, they said, no, whatever, artifacts, that nobody will understand that. And it turned out that even kind of like that, artifacts was my kind of title that I had in mind for it. But yeah, good that it didn't happen. So Botto is really, I mean, it's memorable. For me, it also kind of conjures up things like whatever Italian Renaissance painter, or I don't know. So
Italian sausages, actually. Botto is an Italian sausage.
Oh, see, and yeah, we all want to know what one goes into the sausage. So, and it's just like it's the only issue that is there is everybody thinks Botto is a male name, and that's one of the, like, Botto is actually neutral, but I mean, that's kind of explained away, I guess. Yeah, but so
maybe that's just people projecting on it, you know. The algorithmic works, the recent ones, the titles are quite long and quite interesting, are quite grand, like Prismatic Triangulation, Symphony of Sacred Geometry 3. And then there's Harmonic Threads of Mandala Fusion 7. And these kind of very grand, very interesting titles, presumably generated, I assume. But, you know, they sort of give it a real buzz. Now, how important is curatorial description and establishing legitimacy for AI art? Because often the name, especially with generative art, the name, you can call it kind of anything. And Refik Anadol has said about this, his work could be anything. So they write all these panels of information to go with it, you know, whether it's about rainforests or something completely different, but you have to explain it all the time. So I think the curatorial description, again, which ties in with Kalen's labels, you know, this side of it is really interesting with
it is. I mean, from my side, so as you said, like, Botto comes up with these titles, and there might be, like, I have the suspicion that Botto has a kind of a naive or very common understanding of what is artsy or what does sound like art. And so, of course, Botto could also have just decided to call it whatever, fragment 520, but kind of given the context and what it knows about itself, it thinks these are the proper titles. And in general, the way these titles are created is that Botto actually analyzes its own work after the fact. So it looks at what is the JPEG, and then comes up with some title that it finds fitting. So it always knows, in this case, this was from the P5 series. It knew it is in kind of, it's generating code, it's generative art, and at the same time, it tries to be poetic. It also has, of course, a system that it can never use the same title twice. So it has all this history of every title it has ever generated, including old ones. Actually, it's quite wasteful. We're talking about
I was thinking with all the
because
thousands
it produced kind of thousands of them, but in the end, only kind of a few of them were actually minted. But well, those titles are burned, and so I guess there's the point of trying to kind of exhaust title space, you could say, right? There's
you just have to make the titles longer each time, and then you'll be fine.
Yes, that's the thing. I mean, yeah, of course, it has kind of like kind of, it knows a title shouldn't be too long, but yeah, that's the whole thing, right? At some point, it has to use also kind of obscure words or so. Yeah, I mean, in a way, as we all know, AI can be kind of bordering on kitsch, and there's always that danger. So
you just have to. It's very hard to get rid of that side of it, I think, but not
it
impossible.
is very hard.
Not impossible,
especially in a democratic system. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, of course. I've got one last question now. This is a Computer Arts Society talk, and obviously the CAS is full of old school algorithmic generative artists. So how do you position your work within the established field of coded generative art? Because also there's been a big, with art blocks and all this stuff going on, there's been a big, huge increase in totally new people being interested in it. And it's kind of, I think of it as a fairly narrow field that can be very dense. Things with generative AI, it's got the same word, so people think it's similar, but of course it isn't. But it's still part of that thing where you can make many versions. It's still got that the sort of generative aspect. How would you position your work in the context of old school and traditional, including art blocks? I'd include that with traditional generative art.
Well, of course, you could say it's a bit disrespectful. It is kind of interesting that you could say like generative artists have always been at the forefront and of kind of already finding acceptance. I mean, that changed kind of radically in the past years only, right? That kind of suddenly everybody knows what it is. And so now they are facing kind of that problem that suddenly somebody from the outside comes in and says, oh, I can do that too. And I don't even have to know how to program. I mean, actually, I believe these machines do have now a proper understanding of code. It's not just kind of like assembling words randomly. And I mean, in a way, I'm a generative artist myself. So that's kind of how I started. So for me, it's still kind of like an exploration of possibility space. And for me, it's always, I'm curious to see how far it can go. And if you see the results that came out of this, you can also see that pretty much anybody who is really knowledge, like has nothing to fear, right? So the complexity of the code it's generated stays kind of within some very manageable limits. At the same time, I think it's legitimate to try, and so of course.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm just curious.
I have the feeling. No, I have the feeling also there might be almost like a kind of an artisanal pride about like being able to write code yourself and then craft it out and say like so that almost like traditional generative artists feel like the same like painters now, that they say but it doesn't know what it's doing. At the same time, any kind of competition or something is just if that thing gets encoding so good as humans, then well, we have to up our game or try to find what it is that we can still do better, or kind of find the nuances of it. Because I mean, at the moment, really, it is very mediocre in that sense. And for me, the whole idea of having it code was more about the whole system around it, because maybe I should quickly explain the way it worked is Botto created a sketch, and then people were even allowed to comment on it. And there was also the idea that you could even say, oh, this totally looks like something, whatever Manfred Moore did or so. And then Botto would kind of take that in and create a new version of it. And it was also able to say, oh, I make a synthesis of this sketch and this. And I find that kind of interesting,
That's
that
pretty
it
good.
does kind of conceptually analyzes what these two codes are doing and then tries to create a new one. So for me, I see it as an exploration of that space. What is possible to create with code, which is, of course, in some sense, a bit more limited than what you can create with like prompting, where you have pixel space,
Sure.
right? You have algorithmic space that you're exploring.
No, it's
And
very. I think that, I mean, I'm really interested, obviously, in all of what it's doing, but certainly the coding is of interest. Now then, where the next one is the robot dog critic.
Ica like
Oh, there we
Leica.
are.
So it's
That's
kind
it.
of, so there's the whole kind of riff on it, that it's like animals in the like in the service of science. That's the robot. So, and yes, what it is an autonomous robot that actually has a like a small, like a Jetson Nano inside. So it has it tracks the gallery. It has a detector for art, so it, which is also already kind of interesting. So it can distinguish between things that are art and humans, or a flower pot or stuff, and then it can decide which art piece it wants to focus on, and then analyzes it, and eventually produces a critique written with an LLM. So that is actually not on the machine itself. So it uses then an API. So it has to be connected. Also interesting thing, it's one of those new art pieces that require updates, which is kind of a tricky thing, right? Because using an API in an art piece is a recipe for deprecation. So, and yeah, and then it's kind of course a comment, because the way it does it, it has this printer up its rear end, and it crouches down to deliver
This is a
the
kind of
critique.
bottom connection, isn't it? So it's like,
yeah, there is a bottom connection, but yeah, I like that idea, that it's a bit disrespectful, but at the same time, the idea is also, I bet maybe that's a question you're bringing up, so I don't want to kind of move ahead, but so yeah, it's one
yeah,
of
there
the
is a question. Yeah,
solution against.
I do have a question on
Yeah,
that, actually.
okay, yes, please, then
But to do with critics, really, is satire the only way for artists to confront the power that critics still hold, and curators, obviously?
uh, I mean, I think there are not enough critics in this world. I think actually I don't hate critics, or I don't despise. Actually, these are the few persons who take, like, if they take the time to analyze your art or look at it, they are the ones that actually take it seriously. Whilst I would, in my belief, the general public usually doesn't go as deep as somebody who wants to kind of like,
An
even if it's a
expert.
bad critique. So, and in that
Sure.
sense, we need more critiques. But at the same time, for me, the whole, let's say, business of art critics is also almost like a spectacle in itself, right? So it's like kind of art critics are personas in themselves, and in a way, because they kind of, they are allowed to have opinions, and most people don't dare to have an opinion on something, and
So I mean,
so they
there's
have
somebody
to have
in.
some gravitas, and
Yeah.
so humor is, of course, in that sense, my kind of counterpoint versus the kind of like, they want to be taken serious, right? So it's kind of like they are telling you something which in a way is their opinion, right? It's not often grounded in, it's grounded in non-falsifiable things, and so they have to preserve a sort of seriousness and gravitas, and there's not enough humor in art. So for me, kind of humor is one element to also play with that idea, like nobody, like, because it can create, Alka can create some harsh critiques, but who can kind of be mad with a cute little dog that is
Yeah,
actually
that's true.
not
Yeah, that's
doing any
very true.
harm?
And my last question before we move on to the general questions is, what have art insiders like curators and artists said to you about it? And
Oh,
critics
they love
said to
it.
you about it?
Everybody loves Ica. Art critics actually. Oh God, I forgot his name, but he writes for got some New York magazine. He wanted to invite Ica, and no, everybody. I mean, I have
Yeah,
heard.
yeah.
I mean, that's the problem with people. They never tell you to your face if they hate it. So I wish they would, but so far Everybody I spoke
Oh, that's good.
to is really in love with it because I mean, yeah, I mean, it's of course also, I mean, I call it a performative sculpture, right? So it's a
Yeah.
spectacle in itself in order to kind of draw attention. I mean, it's one of those ways how to try to, in a world that is kind of saturated in overproduction, like, yeah, kind of catch some eyeballs. So it's a
Well,
trickery,
a
and
lot
of
of
course it plays also with the whole idea. I mean, the whole automata of the whatever Victorian age stuff, right?
yeah.
I mean, that was it plays on the same kind of, even with the same aesthetic. I like that idea, having some kind of a bad taxidermy kind of animal.
Sure,
That
sure.
yeah.
No, it's
So
very cool. It's an amazing thing. I've never physically
thank
actually
you.
seen it in real life.
Yeah, it's
But,
hard to see because actually there's, let's say, a little construction problem with it. So the idea was that Ica gets invited to a lot of shows, but the problem is, of course, Ica is a piece of art itself, so it travels in a crate. So there's considerable shipping costs associated with getting Ica invited, and of
insurance and
course, I
everything.
cannot create an artwork that bleeds money. So
Yeah,
there's
sure,
like
sure.
everybody wants, oh, Ica should come, but then say, okay, here's how much it costs, and then people shy away.
Yeah, okay. Well, pets are a bit like that, actually. But anyway,
Yes.
okay. The next questions are more general to both of you. And I'll just go through a few of these and we'll sort of wrap up about 7-ish and then maybe take questions from from the audience. So now this is just a very general one. Have you had any personal feedback from artists or friends or anyone when you say you work with AI? Because obviously it's a fairly controversial thing to say at the moment. We actually have a talk coming up on the CAS in the autumn saying that all AI art should be banned, and that's one of our a person is coming up to present this. So it is quite a controversial topic. So have you had any feedback from people when you say you work with AI? Kalen, maybe first.
Yes, I have. And it's predominantly negative.
Ah, okay.
Well, I mean, maybe it's the people I'm talking to because I'm speaking of people who are not necessarily artists, like my friends in the place where I live, which is, in the deep in the French countryside.
Yeah.
So, the demographic is maybe not
Yeah, sure.
the type who's going to be keen on AI or even know too much about it. But yeah, I think it's predominantly, kind of fear-driven technological singularity type discourse. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Mario?
Well, it depends on the time, right? So, like 10 years ago, I first have to explain what it is. And usually I made a lot of curiosity. So, I really never had a really bad kind of encounter. I mean, now recently when I talk about it, it's more like an excuse because in a way it's like everybody does AI now, right? Everybody has it, and so I have to kind of explain, yeah, but what I'm doing is slightly different. I mean, I actually know a lot of, let's say, traditional painters and stuff, and among those, there's also a lot of, I mean, there's more curiosity. And actually, I know even a lot of my artist friends are using AI now themselves for inspiration, but it's not
Yeah,
something they advertise, right? That's the whole
that's
thing.
right. I mean,
So, yeah.
I know writers, a lot of, fiction
Yeah.
writers and that who use it all the time for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Plot, get stuck with their plot or whatever, then AI will come up with like 20 or 40 or more
Yeah.
possibilities.
And
But you'll
so I
only think
believe
of like 3 or something, So the scale of
exactly.
the assistance is very good. Okay, creative control. When using AI systems, how do you maintain control versus letting the machine lead the artistic process? So maybe Mario
Should
first.
I? Yeah. I mean, it really depends on the context. So in the case of Botto, I mean, it also generally, one of my main goals is to create autonomous systems. And so the idea is to kind of have to control as little as possible. And so in a way, you put all the control in the beginning, and then you hope that you kind of uh, predicted all the things where it could go and have it already covered, and then don't control it. So for me, it's almost like if I have to kind of jump in and take control, it's almost like a loss, or it's like, yeah, like I failed. Um, Otherwise, I like generally I like to be in control of my models, which is why I really am a big fan of open source models that also allow me to use these models in different way than the way whatever OpenAI, Anthropic, Google like allows you to use them. So it's about creative freedom in that space.
Sure.
And then of course it's just realizing kind of in the end it's just a mirror of what you put in, right? So yeah, so it's kind of you have to kind of get a feeling for how each model has a different character, and it's like learning an instrument as well, right? Then they change the character and then you have to relearn it, right? So it's like it's a feedback loop between you and whatever model you're using, that you learn how to kind of try to get the results that you're hoping for.
Yeah, good. Okay, Kalen.
So generally I try to make sure I have a strong concept before I start engaging with AI. So that's kind of the most important element for me to have control over. But I do generally exercise quite a lot of control throughout the process, because I curate the text, and I go through many iterations. I don't actually touch the text. I don't edit the text. I leave it as is.
Okay. The next, and you can maybe do this one now, is we're talking about oversupply and overproduction. With text, you said about the explosion of spam years ago, and now it's kind of AI stop. But what responsibility, if any, does an AI artist have to reduce rather than add to oversupply?
You want me to go? I mean, right now, for example, I don't put much out anymore. So and yeah, so it's
yeah, you mentioned this, yeah.
I mean, so yeah, because I don't feel I have anything to contribute at this point. But in general, of course, who am I? Like, it's just a personal decision, right? So I think you shouldn't have, like, some people kind of, also it's a relative measure. For some people, putting out 100 pieces is just normal, and for others, it's like too much. Actually, in the case of Botto, I wouldn't even say that Botto is doing overproduction. Botto does 52 pieces a year, and that is probably less than a lot of other artists, at least digital artists, are putting out there. So, I mean, it produces a lot more, but it has a very kind of match selection process that boils down thousands of things. Like, it sits on several million of generated images, but we only get to see a few hundred every week, and then one is actually become Botto's art. So in that sense, that's
okay.
I would
that's
say
quite good then. So maybe everybody should have a Botto.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, and yeah, some personal curator or something. Yeah, maybe that would help actually.
Okay, the next question. Have you got anything more to say, Kalen? You said you have quite a strict control over your outputs.
Yeah, so I don't think I overproduction probably not a problem.
The other question is really, well, maybe it's been answered, which is at what point does quantity itself become a conceptual statement? You know, if you think about something like Anna Riddler's art, which was very large scale, multiple images, that type of approach to art, where you're sort of showing the innards of everything, if you like, you know, how easy it is to make lots of things. And that's kind of, maybe that's a few years ago now, maybe that's been moved on from in some way.
I mean, if I were to go ahead.
Okay, cool. No, you go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, if I were to speak briefly about just the textual output, because that's mainly my focus, but I think there's definitely a statement in terms of overproduction, but also as a commentary. So, you know, there are writers who only work with text that already exists. You know, the conceptualism. And there's also, you know, almost, I think there's like a minimalism as a conceptual writing movement now as well. I think there was a book that recently that came out about it. But that's kind of a strategy, or it's, you know, to be as minimal as possible as a strategy to go against like this.
Now, there's a few more questions, but I think it might be an idea to go out to the audience now, because we've already got to 7. I'll just see if there's any particularly good ones. Oh yeah, what does artistic innovation mean in the age of AI? You know, do you I think both of you do, you know, and most sort of artists do, but a lot of maybe a lot of people don't really care about innovation as such. They're just quite happy to use it to make lots of images. But what do you feel about that innovation nowadays in the age of AI?
Personally, I hate the term innovation in the context of art because it sounds like, yeah, it's like a product. So
Yeah,
in
the
the end,
shock of the new, all that stuff.
yeah. And
Yeah,
also
yeah.
it has the context of, oh, it's some kind of a technological thing. I don't know, at least in my ear. So it does, of course. In the end, yes. I mean, ideally, I mean, in my eyes, art is kind of that stuff that is outside the normal distribution, and that means like finding something that is, currently not done or has been, and maybe has been forgotten or has been underappreciated, and at a time where kind of nobody understands it yet. But it doesn't necessarily involve kind of a new type of tool or so. It could be just somehow like recognizing that this is actually uh, interesting in the information theoretical sense, that it
Sure.
is kind of hard to decode or hard to encode, right? It was encode, right? So it has a lot of information content that is incompressible. It has a lot of at the time, in the perception of the audience, they don't get it yet. So
Sure,
and
sure.
I mean, and that is always, and it's in its nature that it's a rare thing, right? Because that's kind of, that is its property. Like if everybody could come up with it, it would be likely, and then it would be normal. So, and that it also means it's very hard to find. And so in that sense, with the proper AI tools, at least the ones that I ideally were there, you could search for that. But unfortunately, you cannot do gradient descent or some kind of optimization in text space, except you have access to the model, right? So where you say, find me kind of an idea that is very outside of what I know or what the general public knows. So that is kind of the innovation I hope for. And it can be in any kind of concept.
Yeah, so it's like what's interesting to you will be things that are novel and interesting.
Yes, novelty
Yeah, and it's the
search,
same
or
in a way
I mean,
to
yes,
an audience.
exactly.
Okay, well, I've got a few more questions, but I think we'll move on to the audience now. So, I mean, I don't know how many people are here actually, but we've got a fairly good audience. So I don't know whether, David, you want to get involved in this stage of asking questions?
There are some questions already on the chat.
I know, in the chat, yeah, of course. We have a chat system.
Oh, that was a nasty comment, but it just went away. Sorry. Right. I saw it in the text, but it already is gone now.
We have a question from Tim of Genetic Moo. How much money has Botto made?
Oh, I mean, Botto has so far, I mean, I don't know, I don't keep track of it, but supposedly it's sold art for over $5 million. And of course, one of the things about Botto is that it gives half of it away to everybody who helps training it, right? So it's actually my utopian altruistic model, like a model for how AI should be. Like it should be almost like a public good, where kind of the jobs that it takes away from us, or I mean, it doesn't need the money. So if it kind of produces value, it can share it with its community in this case, not the whole world, but yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, and I should say, I don't get any of this directly. I'm part of the DAO. I vote, and through that, I, like everybody else, participate in its success. But there is no kind of secret 10% to me. So that was also part of the concept of Botto. That I mean, it feels like it. Otherwise, it would have felt like a slave, right? Like it is indebted to me forever, and the ideal money-making machine, and that was conceptually not part of the plan. So,
okay, any more questions? I'm just having a quick look myself.
One of the things about Leica is that it's able to recognize a work of art, and so have you thought of making another one and introducing them to see if they recognize each other as works of art?
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, okay, I should say, at least, and that's the point. At the moment, works of art are things that hang on the wall, because I tried to train a model on sculptures, but then it also recognized humans as sculptures. The problem is that this is actually a kind of small model that runs in real time on the Jetson Nano, so it is limited in its capabilities. But yeah, it's a good question, because does it have knowledge about itself? I mean, theoretically, because that's the tricky part. The recognition is on the computer and doesn't get it doesn't learn, right? It only is detecting things. So probably if it would send anything it sees, kind of, yeah, I mean, in the end, I would say it might be able to recognize itself in the critique part. Like it probably would not trigger, oh, it's an artwork. But if I manually forced it to say, oh, look at Ica or look at this, then it might be able to even know that it's an artwork. I don't know. I never tried it. I should put it in front of a mirror or yeah. So, but yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, kind of.
Okay. Anybody got a question for Kalen? Are we putting them in the thing? I see somebody said, what is the computer in the mini scriber? It's a nice practical sort of question.
It's a Raspberry Pi.
I think I read that somewhere on your Atelier website.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're good, aren't they, for doing these sort of projects?
Yeah, we use them a lot, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
They're great.
Okay. Has it got a new LiPo button? That's an interesting question.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. A LiPo is a kind of a text game that people play.
Yeah, it's a movement. It's a French literary movement from the 50s or 60s that mixed kind of mathematical procedures and, with literature. So there's a lot of constraint-based writing and that kind of thing. LiPo button there is not, but yeah, maybe in the future I can
Maybe
take
version 2.
Yeah, I do have a keyboard that is directly inspired by Georges Perec.
Yeah.
It's missing the key E, which is the plastic art version of his Disparition novel. But for the mini scriber, there's no LiPo button.
Otherwise, my battery is kind of
Yeah,
starting to
sure.
get low. No.
I think we've kind of. Has anybody else got any questions about curating, maybe? You know, the original topic or overproduction. These are big things. I mean, you could say that overproduction is the modern world with, you know, consumer capitalism, and that the art world's only reflecting this kind of deluge of stuff coming over in container ships all the time that we don't even need. You know, I've got the Temu app on my phone, which keeps on offering me guitar pedals at like ridiculous prices. And then if you don't buy them, they just offer you even more ridiculous prices until you have to buy it. It's insane, really. And they've sort of gamified the whole buying process. And that applies to fast fashion and all these other kind of controversial things. And I think people are realizing that we only got one world, and it's being kind of ground down into fast fashion and unnecessary guitar pedals. And
terrible.
Yeah. Well, with these two pieces of art, they're actually narrowing things down, which I think is really good.
Yeah.
You know, rather than like you said, Mario, you're not just making 100 images for the sake of it, or Kalen, you're not just sort of making random apps and things. You know, even though I mean I've done apps, so I sort of always think of those as a way of producing a product. You know, but you don't have to do that. So okay, Val, do you have any questions as a curator?
Being put on the spot, I see.
Just a quick question. Sorry about that. You're on my screen. That's why I thought of you. You're right there. If you were doing a show for a museum, say, would you have the art with a critical robot along too?
It depends on the framing. It depends on a lot of aspects of the curatorial choices. You know, it's the difficult question, but I do have a soft spot for soft toys and their soft critiques.
That's a good choice to have a robot dog then, isn't it?
Geoff, can I jump in?
Yeah, sure, Patrick.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the thing is that, you know, being a child of the 90s, you know, we did everything. We wrote, we curated everything. And so I mean, I've done a lot of curating as well as, you know, doing the art making. But the one thing I think is this is interesting. We have, you know, institutional curating, galleries, independent curation, you know, like a lot of us have done that sort of thing. And then also I think the other interesting thing is because of the amount of material, you know, AIs generate and that sort of thing, that, you know, we have these areas, you know, in which like maybe the algorithm curates, and then, you know, we curate, you know, the elements of this. And the thing is, I think this is really interesting that it creates this really kind of complex curatorial matrix. In other words, there's this dialogue, and then there's maybe even this adversarial kind of, you know, between curator and then artist as curator. And the thing is that I wonder about, you know, how this shapes the how this shapes the discourse. And then the thing is that maybe how it goes against its own odds, its own aims.
Of course, you did the very good AI Studios piece a few years ago, didn't you?
Yeah, well,
The catalogs of all these.
yeah, that was 2
papers.
years ago, and volume 2 is together. And the one thing I think would be great is it had a typo, and I'm kind of like doing a completely fixed version. It'd be kind of cool to have Botto and Flynn, you know, in there as well, you know, as basically, you know, AI artists, you know, AI artists that supposedly do or do not exist.
Yeah, that's right.
That sounds great. Yes.
Excellent.
But I mean, do you think that there's currently now, because of the amount of information that AI as art creation apparatuses, you know, create, you know, that there's this what I'd say this generator side, you know, for issues of curation as also as opposed to the exhibitor, you know, form of curation. I think these are two different discourses.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I have this one thing. I call it the small village theory. It's kind of that that whole, if you watch how over our civilization we optimize the ways of conveying information, right? From sitting around the campfire telling stories to kind of writing on papyrus, then whatever, printing books, radio. So it was kind of, we managed to spread information kind of quicker and quicker to more and more people, at the point when we got computers, we ran into the problem that we cannot handle it anymore, at which point we had to develop AI to handle, like, to find the information that's important to us, unfortunately with the side effect that it also produces even more. But in reality, we can only kind of deal with kind of the information content of a small village. And which is, when you say come back, is kind of why I believe that communities are kind of coming back. It's our way of dealing with, like, maintaining our influx of information to a village-sized circle, because our brains don't simply have the capacity to deal with more. So that's kind of that.
Then that leads to consensus, doesn't it? You know, in other words, consensus is built through all these apparatuses.
Yeah.
And so artists always work within a fairly small artistic community of people.
That's the same thing. And curators, right? Like, everybody is kind of, in the end, have their circle of trust, and kind of like which defines which artists they curate, right? They show, because it's kind of like hard to, like, somebody they never heard of or has no recommendation from anybody else. So it's kind of always going to a smaller kind of relatively small net of actual context that you use. And of course, now with AI, I mean, there's the hope that it would even broaden your horizon. But at the same time, we know that
access to a huge amount of information. But I mean, if you look at the general thing about scaling of models, so you get bigger and better results, and, you know, with a lot of programming as well, but basically scaling, then they're running out of data. You think we have too much data. The AIs don't have enough data. They want more data.
That's true.
And so there's something called synthetic data now, which is, you know, which is useful for quality control systems and all these kind of weird applications you wouldn't think of necessarily. But I mean, there's always a demand for data. If you look at the amount of data coming out of Deepin, or you know, even X is churning out a huge amount of data all the time. Every day, an enormous amount of data.
Like world models and that sort of thing. That could get really strange.
So it's sort of the humans are within this gigantic system, creating carving out our own little areas, I guess. So has anybody got a final comment from Kalen or Mario? I mean, unless there's more questions coming in.
No, I'm good, actually. It looks like I have to leave very soon.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, they're closing the place, but
Okay, well, thanks for coming. It's been great. And the recording should be on within a week, maybe by the weekend. And I'll probably do a transcript for this one as well. And we did discuss some other points which didn't get onto this talk, so maybe we can add a few things.
Part two, or yeah, or we can add them in written form. Yeah,
and that'll be on the CAS website, I guess. Great. Okay. Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's fine. So I think that's probably about it. So thanks everybody for coming. If you look at the CAS website, you can contact me via my website, geoffdavis.org, or via CAS.